So today I'm going to talk to you guys about being transgender. And being transgender is when your given sex does not match the gender that you identify with. So for example, if you were a man who was physically a man but felt intrinsically like a woman and wanted to live your life as a woman, you would be transgendered. Or on the flip side, if you were physically a woman and you wanted to live your life as a man, you would be transgendered. In the past, transgender was called transsexual, and that's still an acceptable term, but the more common and more correct term is transgender. A national transgender discrimination survey found that 26% of transgendered people had been physically assaulted at least once in their life because of anti-trans bias, and 50% of all LGBT hate crimes are against trans women and girls, and of these hate crimes, these were lethal hate crimes, so 50% of murders perpetrated against LGBT people are against trans women and girls. The American Psychological Association, again, defines a transgender person as someone whose gender and sex are not in accord. There's lots of different terms for transgender people that are incorrect, and misconceptions about transgender people. And I think one of the first would be that transgender people are hermaphrodites or were born with ambiguous genitalia, which is incorrect. Not to say that people that were born with both sets of genitalia or ambiguous genitalia do not have problems with gender identity. They're not classically transgender. Another misconception about transgender people would be that they are cross-dressers, and cross-dressers are not necessarily transgender. A transgender person could be cross-dressing, but there are plenty of cross-dressers who cross-dress as a part of sexual identity expression that don't necessarily want to take hormones or physically alter their body to become the gender that they play out in their life. I think the most common way I personally hear transgender people referred to is as trannies or she-males or he-she, and all of these terms are considered hate speech against transgender people. The correct ways to identify transgender people is to call them MTF or FTM, which stands for male to female or female to male. To talk about transgender people as a group, you can say trans people. Definitely understanding the correct way to talk about people that are different than what we understand as normative is helpful and necessary. Currently, there's very little legislation in our government to protect transgender people who are often discriminated against in housing and in employment. 15 states and the District of Columbia have imposed current measures to protect transgender people in employment. But for only 15 states out of 50, we can tell that something is very lacking in legislation protecting transgender people. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act has been trying to protect trans people, but has still not been passed by the House and Senate, and has never gone to a president's desk to be signed. And the Employment Non-Discrimination Act simply makes it illegal to fire or discriminate against someone in hiring practices because they are gay, lesbian, or transgender. 2009's Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crime Act is the only legislation on the books that even has the word transgender in it that is current law. And I suppose the one protection transgender people have is that when people are being prosecuted for their murders or for assaulting them or for harassing them, hate crimes legislation could make the penalties for committing crimes against transgender people larger. If there's anything I want you to take away from this speech, it is the correct way to speak about transgender people, to hopefully understand that they're no different than us, and even the American Psychological Association will say that it is not a disorder. There's nothing wrong with transgender people. they just don't feel matched inside with their gender and their sex. And the easiest way to support transgender people is to support politicians and legislation that protects them. Um, I personally know many transgender people, but most of the people I know don't. And I think it's hard to understand an issue when a lot of us don't have a face to put up against it. If you want to support transgender people, you can support the Employment Non-Discrimination Act by calling your senators and representatives and voicing that opinion. Thank you for your time.